I never believed in ghosts until the night I saw my wife's journal entry. My wife has been in an inpatient unit for a few weeks now. It breaks my heart, but we can't currently have her at home. I've been juggling 0 paternity leave, taking care of the baby, taking care of her, and just trying to survive this hard time for my family. I wanted to share her journal entry that staff shared with me, in hopes that it may help another family recognize the signs, and more importantly, the risks, sooner than I did. Journal entry, August 6, February 2024. I'm a new mom, but I don't know where my baby is. I hear phantom crying at all times of the day and all hours of the night while I lay in a strange bed in this cold and sterile room, unable to sleep. That shrill, incessant, terrible noise constantly claws at my eardrums. I feel the blood seeping slowly out of my ears, and these people keep telling me there's no blood there. But I know they're lying. They're lying directly to my face. They don't care about me. They want to see me suffer. There's no baby to soothe. It's just me here, and my kidnappers who come in sometimes. I want to clamp my hands over my ears as tight as they will go until I can both hear and feel my own heartbeat, but I know nothing can block out the crying. I couldn't cover my ears anyway because they have me chained up. The people who took me are not kind. They are bad, bad people. They poke me and prod me. They leave me here laying in my own filth. They come and clean my bed and then just leave me once again, ignoring my cries and my pleading to please for the love of God let me out. Once in a while they let me out of my shackles. They chain me back down when I fight back. I managed to get a chunk of hair off of one of them. I didn't see that one again. She was crying when I ripped the stupid hairs from her skull. But why was she crying? She's the one who took me away from my baby. I don't remember when I got here. I can't fathom how they managed to take me. I don't remember my baby's face. I remember my husband, and I hate him. That son of a bitch just stood there and watched as they carted me away, while I was screaming and thrashing, attempting to break free. I remember pretty lights as they threw me in the back of their van. The van is where the torture started. They shoved needles into my arms and injected me with things. I blacked out, and when I came to, I was chained to the bed in this unfamiliar room. I spent what felt like days, weeks, months awake, staring at that disgusting brown patch on the ceiling, being driven crazy by the drip, drip, drip of the broken faucet in the corner and the never-ending sound of an inconsolable baby. I just wanted to find that stupid kid and shut it up once and for all. I couldn't listen to another second of that unending crying anymore. I know they're watching me. I can see the cameras they have all around me. I think they're experimenting on me because whenever they come in, they inject me with unknown liquids that make me feel funny, that make me feel enraged, that make me lose time, lose memories of what it is they're doing to me. There are other victims here. Sometimes they make us see each other. Some of the others are more calm than I am. They must be the ones who have been here the longest. They're even nice to our assailants. They chat with them and laugh with them, and I don't understand it. Why would you be friendly with these people? We should be working together to find a way out. I decided they must be pretending, so I decided to pretend too. They must be onto something because when I play nice, they're more lenient. Today they let me have some paper and a pencil, but a dull one, probably anticipating that I may shove it into one of their jugulars at the first opportunity. Not only are they bad people, but they're idiots too. They kidnapped me and thought I wouldn't use this opportunity to tell people the atrocities I'm suffering at their hands. They thought I'd just continue to sit back and take it, and tell no one. I called my husband yesterday to tell him how much I hate him. He told me they're just helping me. What an awful man. They're not helping me. He won't help me. I wonder if he ever loved me. I seriously doubt it. I'd never let something like this happen to someone I love. He keeps telling me I might hurt my baby, but I would never do that. I don't know where I am. I am so scared that I will never get out and need to continue to endure this unrelenting torture. I have no hope of getting out. The windows are bolted shut and there are bars on them, further cementing that this is a prison sentence. This must be a professional criminal organization. They have me. Someone please. Please save me. I just want to see my baby. I need to know he's all right. Reading those words was like looking into a mirror of pure terror. It wasn't just my wife who was haunted. It was me, too. Every shadow in our home seemed darker, every noise more sinister. The hospital assured me it was just postpartum psychosis, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something more insidious was at play. What if she wasn't delusional? What if the spirits of that place had gotten to her, warping her reality until she couldn't see the truth anymore? That night, as I put our baby to bed, I heard it. The faint sound of a baby crying, echoing through the walls. It wasn't my child, who lay sleeping peacefully. It was a sound that chilled my blood, a phantom cry from another world. I couldn't help but wonder if my wife's torment had followed me home, and if the real horror was only just beginning. That first night alone with the baby after my wife's journal entry was a descent into madness. The house was unnaturally quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old wood or the faint hum of the refrigerator. It felt as though the walls were closing in on me, pressing down with a weight that suffocated my every breath. I tried to distract myself, turning on the television and letting the mindless chatter fill the void. But even that seemed sinister, the voices distorted and hollow, like echoes from a distant, desolate place. After putting the baby to bed, I sat in the nursery, staring at the crib. The room was dimly lit by a small nightlight shaped like a smiling moon. It cast eerie shadows that danced on the walls, twisting and turning like dark phantom figures. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by exhaustion and stress. But deep down, I knew better. I felt a presence, something unseen yet palpable, lurking just beyond my sight. The clock ticked slowly, each second dragging on like an eternity. As I sat there, I heard it. The faintest sound of crying, almost imperceptible at first. My heart raced, and I instinctively looked at the crib, but the baby was sound asleep. The crying grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was coming from somewhere else, somewhere within the house. I stood up, my legs shaky, and followed the sound. It led me down the hallway, past the closed doors of empty rooms. The crying grew louder, echoing off the walls, until I reached the door to the basement. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The rational part of me screamed to turn back, but an inexplicable force compelled me to open the door. The basement was pitch black, the light switch unresponsive. I grabbed a flashlight from a nearby drawer and descended the creaky wooden steps, each one groaning under my weight. The crying was deafening now, reverberating off the cold concrete walls. I reached the bottom and swept the beam of light across the room. Boxes of old belongings, forgotten and covered in dust, lined the walls. But there was no sign of a baby, no sign of anything that could be making that noise. I felt a cold draft, and the flashlight flickered, casting long, sinister shadows. The crying stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, straining to hear anything, even the slightest sound. And then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the crying started again, this time right behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam darting across the room, but there was nothing there. The sound was piercing, like nails on a chalkboard, and I dropped the flashlight in panic. It rolled across the floor, casting wild, erratic beams of light. In the chaotic dance of shadows, I saw something. Just a glimpse. A small figure darting into the darkness. Terror seized me, and I stumbled back up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I stood there, panting, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me up, something unseen that now lingered in the shadows of my home. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The house was silent again, but I felt the presence, a dark, oppressive force that watched and waited. The baby stirred in his crib, and I held my breath, praying that he wouldn't wake. But the phantom crying echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the terror that lurked just beneath the surface of our lives. The next few days were a blur of exhaustion and unease. The crying from the basement haunted me, a relentless reminder that something was terribly wrong. I tried to convince myself it was just the stress of the situation, But deep down, I knew that was a lie. I started avoiding the basement entirely, unwilling to confront whatever was lurking down there. During the day, I busied myself with chores, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the baby's sake. But the nights were unbearable. The crying would start up again, sometimes faint, sometimes loud enough to wake the baby. I'd lie in bed, heart pounding, listening to the phantom wails echoing through the house. I barely slept, my mind racing with fear and doubt. One evening, I decided to confide in my best friend, Mark. We had known each other since college, and he was the one person I trusted completely. I called him up and invited him over, hoping he could provide some rational explanation for what was happening. Mark arrived just after sunset, bringing a six-pack and his usual easygoing demeanor. As soon as he stepped inside, I felt a little of the tension ease. We sat in the living room, the baby monitor on the coffee table between us, and I told him everything. My wife's journal entry, the crying, the feeling of being watched. Mark listened, his expression growing more serious with each passing minute. When I finished, he leaned back, his eyes narrowed in thought. "Man, that's intense," he said. "But you know, stress can do crazy things to your mind. Maybe you're just hearing things." "I thought about that," I admitted. "But it feels so real, Mark. And it's not just the crying. It's the feeling that there's something here. Something dark." He took a swig of his beer, his gaze drifting to the baby monitor. "Have you checked out the basement? Maybe there's something down there making the noise." "I did," I said, shuddering at the memory. There was nothing. But I think I saw something move. Mark's eyebrows shot up. "Like what?" "I don't know. It was small, like a child, but it was too quick. I only saw it for a second." He nodded slowly. "Okay, let's go check it out. Together." I hesitated, the thought of going back down there filling me with dread. But Mark's presence gave me a semblance of courage. "All right," I agreed, "but we're taking flashlights." We grabbed a couple of flashlights from the kitchen drawer and headed towards the basement door. I felt my heart rate spike as we approached, the phantom cries echoing in my mind. Mark went first, flipping the switch on his flashlight and descending the stairs with steady steps. I followed, my grip on the flashlight so tight my knuckles turned white. The basement was just as dark and foreboding as I remembered. We swept our beams of light across the room, illuminating boxes and old furniture covered in dust. The air was thick and musty, the silence almost deafening. I half expected the crying to start up again, but all I heard was the sound of our breathing. "See anything?" Mark asked, his voice a whisper. "Nothing," I replied, my voice barely audible. We continued our search, moving deeper into the basement. Mark opened a few boxes, revealing old toys and forgotten memorabilia. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that could explain the crying. I was beginning to think maybe I had imagined it all, that maybe it was just the stress and lack of sleep getting to me. But then, Mark stopped, his flashlight beam frozen on a spot in the corner. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. I followed his gaze and felt my blood run cold. In the far corner of the basement, partially obscured by shadows, was a small, child-sized figure. It was motionless, its back to us, but there was something unnervingly wrong about it. I stepped closer, my flashlight trembling in my hand, and saw that it was a doll. A life-sized porcelain doll with a cracked face and eyes that seemed to follow us. "Is that yours?" Mark asked, his voice shaky. I shook my head. "No. I've never seen it before." We stared at the doll, neither of us daring to move. The air grew colder, and I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The doll's eyes seemed to glint in the flashlight's beam, a malevolent spark that sent shivers down my spine. Mark stepped back, his face pale. "Let's get out of here, man. This is seriously creepy." I didn't need any convincing. We hurried back up the stairs, leaving the doll and the darkness behind. As we shut the basement door, I felt a strange mix of relief and terror. The crying had stopped, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. And now, there was a new question haunting my mind. How had that doll gotten into my basement? After Mark left that night, I couldn't shake the image of the doll from my mind. Its cracked face and piercing eyes haunted my every thought. I didn't know where it had come from or how it had ended up in my basement. But one thing was certain. It didn't belong there. Sleep was elusive, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with dark corners and phantom cries. I woke up multiple times, drenched in sweat, convinced I heard the doll's faint, sinister whisper in the silence of the night. The next morning, I decided to take action. I couldn't live like this, constantly on edge, afraid of every shadow. I had to get rid of the doll, to banish whatever malevolent presence it represented from my home. With a newfound determination, I headed back down to the basement. The stairs creaked ominously under my weight, each step echoing in the cold, damp air. I paused at the bottom, taking a deep breath before sweeping my flashlight across the room. The doll was exactly where we had left it, standing in the corner with its back to me. Its presence was even more unsettling in the daylight, the cracked porcelain and faded clothing giving it an eerie, lifelike quality. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached out to grab it, the basement light flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I froze, gripping the doll tightly, my flashlight casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. For a moment, I thought I heard a faint giggle, a childlike sound that sent chills down my spine. Ignoring my mounting terror, I yanked the doll off its perch and carried it upstairs. It felt heavier than it should, as if it was weighted with more than just porcelain and cloth. I could almost sense a resistance, a reluctance to be moved. I shoved that thought aside, focusing on my task. I took the doll out to the backyard, digging a shallow grave near the edge of the property. The soil was damp and heavy, the effort of digging a welcome distraction from my racing thoughts. Once the hole was deep enough, I threw the doll in, covering it quickly with dirt. I tamped down the soil with my foot, trying to ignore the irrational feeling that I was being watched. As I finished, I heard the baby crying from inside the house. The sound was different this time, more insistent and urgent. I rushed back in, my heart in my throat, and found my son sitting up in his crib, tears streaming down his face. I picked him up, shushing him softly, trying to calm my own racing heart in the process. For the rest of the day, things seemed to return to normal. The house felt lighter, less oppressive, and the baby was calm. I dared to hope that I had done the right thing, that burying the doll had banished whatever dark force had taken hold of our home. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy and unnatural. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep, my mind replaying the events of the past few days over and over. Around midnight, I heard it again, the faint sound of crying coming from the backyard. It was different this time, more distant, but unmistakable. I sat up in bed, my body tense with fear. The sound grew louder, more insistent, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The crying seemed to come from the spot where I had buried the doll. As I approached, the sound grew louder, more desperate, until it was almost deafening. I stopped at the edge of the makeshift grave, my heart pounding in my chest. With trembling hands, I shone the flashlight on the ground. The soil was disturbed, as if something had been trying to claw its way out. My breath caught in my throat as I saw tiny handprints in the dirt, leading away from the grave and toward the house. I followed the trail, my fear mounting with every step. The handprints led to the back door, which was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The crying had stopped, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. Inside, the house felt different, colder, as if the very air was charged with malevolence. I crept down the hallway, my heart racing, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the silence. I stopped outside the baby's room, the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open, the flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. my son was still in his crib, sleeping peacefully. But on the floor, next to the crib, was the doll. Its eyes glinted in the flashlight beam, a malevolent spark that sent shivers down my spine. I stared at it, paralyzed with fear, as a cold whisper echoed through the room. "You can't get rid of me." I backed out of the room, my mind racing with terror and confusion. I knew then that this was far from over. Whatever dark force had taken hold of our home wasn't going to be banished so easily, and I was beginning to fear that it had no intention of ever letting us go. The next day, I was a wreck. I couldn't concentrate on anything. My mind kept drifting back to the events of the previous night, the doll's return, and that chilling whisper. The baby seemed to sense my distress, fussing and crying more than usual. I called Mark again, desperate for some advice, some reassurance that I wasn't losing my mind. Mark arrived quickly, his face set in a determined expression. He didn't bring a six-pack this time, just a steely resolve to help me find a solution. I recounted the events of the night, my voice trembling with fear and exhaustion. Mark listened intently, nodding occasionally, his eyes narrowed in thought. "We need to figure out where that doll came from," he said finally. "There's got to be some explanation." We decided to do a thorough search of the house, starting with the basement where we had first found the doll. We combed through the boxes and old furniture, looking for anything that might give us a clue. After hours of searching, we found an old, dusty trunk tucked away in a corner. It was locked, but a few well-placed hits with a hammer broke it open. Inside, we found a collection of old photographs, letters, and various knickknacks. Among them was a faded photograph of a young girl holding the very same doll. The girl looked to be around 8 or 9 years old, her face solemn and serious. There was something unsettling about her eyes, even in the black and white photo. Flipping the photo over, we found a date, 1947, and a name written in neat cursive: Eleanor. There were more photos, each one showing the girl with the doll at various stages of her childhood. In every picture, the doll was present, and Eleanor's expression grew darker, more troubled. Mark found an old journal at the bottom of the trunk. The entries were written in a child's handwriting, detailing Eleanor's life and her relationship with the doll. As we read, a chilling story began to unfold. The doll had been a gift from her mother, a cherished companion at first. But over time, Eleanor started writing about strange occurrences, whispers in the night, objects moving on their own, and the feeling of being watched. One entry stood out: April 3, 1950. "Mother doesn't believe me. She says it's all in my head, that the doll is just a doll. But I know the truth. The doll is alive. It talks to me when no one else is around. It tells me to do things, terrible things. I tried to get rid of it, but it always comes back. I'm scared. I don't know what to do." I looked at Mark, my hands trembling. "This is exactly what's happening to us. The doll. It's haunted or possessed or something. We need to get it out of here." Mark nodded, his face grim. "But how? It seems like no matter what we do, it comes back." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. Then, an idea struck me. Maybe it's not about getting rid of the doll. Maybe it's about confronting it, facing whatever force is controlling it. Mark looked skeptical, but nodded. "It's worth a try. But how do we confront a doll?" I thought for a moment. We need to talk to it. Treat it like it's a real person. Maybe we can find out what it wants, why it's doing this. That night, after putting the baby to bed, Mark and I sat in the living room with the doll between us. It looked harmless, almost pitiful, lying there with its cracked face and lifeless eyes. But we knew better. We knew it was anything but harmless. Taking a deep breath, I spoke to the doll. "Eleanor, if you're here, we want to talk to you. We want to understand what you want, why you're doing this." At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, the air grew colder, and a faint whisper filled the room. It was the same voice I had heard the night before, soft and chilling. "You can't get rid of me." "Why not?" I asked, my voice shaking. What do you want? The whisper seemed to grow louder, more insistent. I want to be free. I've been trapped for so long. I just want to be free. Mark and I exchanged a glance. Free from what? He asked. From the doll. From this prison. I've been trapped here for so long. Please, help me. The desperation in the voice was palpable, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. How can we help you? I asked. There was a pause and then the whisper returned, softer this time. Burn the doll, destroy it completely. That's the only way. I felt a chill run down my spine. Burning the doll seemed like a dangerous proposition, but it was the first solid plan we had. I looked at Mark, who nodded. We'll do it, I said. We'll burn the doll and set you free. We took the doll outside, far from the house. Mark doused it with lighter fluid, and I struck a match. As the flames engulfed the doll, I heard a faint, almost grateful sigh. The fire burned hot and bright, reducing the doll to ashes in minutes. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The oppressive weight lifted, and the house seemed lighter, more welcoming. I didn't hear any more crying that night, and the feeling of being watched disappeared. The next morning, I called the hospital to check on my wife. She was doing better, the doctors said, showing signs of improvement. I hoped that whatever dark force had haunted our home was finally gone, that we could begin to heal and move forward. Mark and I cleaned up the last remnants of the doll, burying the ashes far from the house. As we stood there, the sunlight filtering through the trees, I felt a renewed sense of hope. We had faced the darkness and come through the other side, stronger and more united. As I headed back inside, I glanced at the baby monitor. My son was sleeping peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of relief. The nightmare was over, and we could finally start to rebuild our lives. But in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered a reminder. Some things are never truly gone. And as I closed the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that, somewhere, Eleanor was still watching, still waiting.